Mickey Tyson was walking down the street, enjoying the warm afternoon air. He was in no hurry, he was simply moving forward at his own pace, watching how life was going on around him. A little further on, he heard the faint sound of a child mumbling, the soft clink of metal. Those frustrated noises that came when something just wasn't working. As he got closer, he saw a boy, about 10 or 11 years old, crouched on the sidewalk next to an old and beaten bicycle. The rear wheel was crooked, the chain had come off, and the boy's fingers were smeared with grease as he tried, unsuccessfully, to fix it. His face was furrowed in frustration, his hands were pulling the chain, only for it to come loose again. With a snort, he muttered something under his breath, and dropped his arms in defeat. Max stopped a few steps away, watching for a moment. I had seen that determination before, that stubbornness of wanting to fix something by yourself, but realizing little by little that maybe you needed a little help. He smiled slightly, waiting to see if the boy would keep trying, but when he heard a frustrated, "Man, why is this stupid thing not working?" he knew it was time. "Do you need help?" he asked calmly, taking a step forward. The boy looked up, ready to refuse the offer, but as soon as his eyes landed on Mac, his mouth opened slightly in shock. He blinked a couple of times, as if making sure he wasn't imagining things. Because the man who was offering to fix his bike. It was Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson was walking down the street, enjoying the warm afternoon air. It was one of those quiet days, the kind where you're not in a hurry, with nowhere to go, just moving along at your own pace, and watching the world go by. A little further on, he heard the clink of metal, the sound of something making noise, followed by a frustrated sigh. A few more steps, and he saw the source of the problem, a boy, about 10 or 11 years old, crouched next to his bicycle. His hands covered with grease, and his face furrowed in concentration. The bike was not in good condition. The rear wheel looked scruffy, and the chain had come off completely. The boy was working on it with that stubbornness that Mac recognized. He wasn't the type to ask for help easily. I was pulling the chain, trying to put it on the gears, but as soon as I let it go, it came out again. He grunted, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a trail of grease on his skin, and muttered something exasperated under his breath. Max stopped a few steps away, crossing his arms as he watched. I had seen this before, the determination, the refusal to give up, the quiet frustration that grew with every failed attempt. The boy was close, but not close enough, and Mac knew that feeling all too well. He waited for a moment, letting the boy try to figure it out, but when he heard a frustrated, "Man, why this stupid thing doesn't work?" he knew it was time. "Do you need help?" he asked calmly, taking a step forward. The boy was slightly startled, looking up as if he was ready to refuse the offer, but then he saw who was in front of him. His mouth half opened, his hands remained suspended in the air, and his eyes opened in disbelief. He blinked once, twice, as if making sure he wasn't seeing things. Because the man who was offering to fix his bike. It was Mike Tyson. Jason had been concentrating on his bike for so long that when the voice interrupted him, he almost didn't process what was going on. I was waiting for some random adult, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone telling him to get out of the way. Maybe just a passerby with unsolicited advice. What I didn't expect was that deep, familiar voice, the one I'd heard in movies, interviews, and, of course, in the boxing ring. He looked up, blinking against the evening light, and for a moment, his brain refused to connect the dots. There, standing there, arms folded, watching him with that patient calm that only someone who has seen and done everything could have, was Mike Jason. Jason's fingers, still covered in grease, were floating uselessly in the air, as if they had forgotten what they were supposed to do. He felt his mouth slightly open, but no words came out. For a second, all he could do was stare. Why? What were the odds? He'd been struggling with his bike chain for the last 20 minutes, cursing under his breath, covered in sweat and dirt, and now, of all people possible, Jason was standing in front of him, asking if he needed help. Jason's first instinct was disbelief. His mind was trying to make sense of the situation. Was he a double? Was his brain playing tricks on him? But no, the voice, the posture, the slight smile that seemed to be waiting for his reaction, it was all too real. This was really happening. He blinked again, trying to articulate words, but his brain still wouldn't cooperate. Mike, still watching him, let out a faint laugh. "Are you okay, kid?" Jason finally managed to swallow saliva and nodded, although his body still felt strangely frozen. Yes, yes. Only, he looked at his bike, suddenly feeling ridiculous for how long he had been struggling with it. It's just the chain. He keeps coming out. Mark took a step closer, crouching down beside her and taking a quick look at the bike. Let's see. Jason leaned back a little as Mac reached for the pedal and turned it, watching as the chain jumped but failed to engage properly. He gave the rear wheel a little shake, stealing the tension, and nodded to himself. Yes. Have you been using it for a long time? Jason nodded quickly. Yes, it was my brother's. He gave it to me, but it's already kind of old. Mac mumbled in understanding, wiping his fingers on his jeans before reaching for the chain carefully. Yeah, it happens a lot. You gotta keep this clean, man. If a lot of dirt accumulates, the grease thickens, and the next thing you know, it starts to slip like now. Jason watched intently, still not fully absorbing that Jason was crouched next to him, casually talking to him about bike maintenance. Mac adjusted the chain, trying to put it back on, but just when he seemed to have succeeded, it slipped out again. He let out a little sigh and smiled with amusement. Well, this one has some fight in it. Jason smiled. I told you so. As Mac worked, his fingers moving with a practiced ease, there was something about that moment that felt familiar. It had been decades since I had last fixed a bicycle chain, but the muscle memory was still there. He recalled his childhood in Brooklyn, riding his own old bicycle, and feeling that same frustration when the chain came off in the middle of the road, leaving him stranded blocks from home. He remembered the older boys teaching him how to fix it, how to turn the rear wheel just the right way to get the right tension, how to make his way through the dirt until he got it back in place. He had been like this kid once, sitting on the sidewalk, his hands covered in grease, staring at a problem that seemed bigger than it really was. And now he was the one who was helping. Funny how life works. As Mac continued to deal with the chain, Jason's brain finally started to catch up with reality, and the initial shock began to fade. So, did you really used to ride a bike? He asked, still watching Mac's every move. Mac let out a laugh. Man, what do you think? I didn't always ride in limousines. Jason smiled in disbelief. Yeah, but I mean, you were boxing, weren't you? You didn't have time for things like this. Mike nodded, wiping his fingers on his jeans again, before slightly adjusting the rear wheel. Yes, but he was still a child. Everyone was riding a bike. That was the way we moved. If you didn't have one, you were trapped. Jason nodded, as if that made all the sense in the world. Mac turned the pedal one more time, and, this time, the chain caught. He watched her turn a couple of times, making sure she was stable, and then he backed up a little. "Ready, try it now." Jason hesitated for a second, then grabbed the handlebars and pressed the pedal. The bike moved forward smoothly, the chain remained in place. He took a quick lap around the parking lot, testing the brakes, before returning to where Mac was standing. "Hey, it's working." Mike nodded. "I told you, man. You just needed a little patience." Jason smiled, looking at his bike like it was new again. For the first time in the last hour, Jason was no longer frustrated. His hands were still covered in grease, but now it didn't feel like a mess, but like proof that he had fixed something. Well, mostly Mac had fixed it, but still, he had learned something. He wiped his hands on his shorts and looked at Mac. "Thank you, really." Mike shrugged his shoulders. "It's nothing. Knowledge has to be passed on." Jason nodded, still smiling. "Yes. It makes sense." Jason ran his leg over the bike, preparing to leave, but then stopped. "My name is Jason, by the way." Mike smiled. "Nice to meet you, Jason." Jason hesitated for a second, and then added, "You're great, man." Mike laughed. "Yeah, you too, kid. Now get rolling before you mess it up again." Jason smiled and walked away. Mint Ross Jason was pedaling down the street. He kept glancing at his bike, waiting for the chain to come loose again. But he didn't. The ride was smooth, the pedals were turning without resistance, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about it breaking at any moment. It wasn't just about the bike. It was about knowing that I could fix it. And maybe, next time, I wouldn't even need help. Mac watched the boy disappear down the street, then wiped his hands on his jeans one last time, and kept walking. It hadn't been a great time. There were no cameras, no crowd, not a viral moment. Just a kid, a bike, and a little patience. And for Mac, that was more than enough. Jason grabbed the handlebars of his bike, his fingers still a little sticky from the grease that had been wiped off earlier. The chain was back in place, the wheel was firm, but for some reason, he hesitated before propelling himself. Maybe because, for the last half hour, every time I tried to ride, something went wrong. Maybe I didn't quite trust that the bike was actually fixed. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that the Tyson, was right there, watching him, arms folded, waiting to see if the guy would jump in or if he would have to intervene again. Jason looked at the pedals, took a deep breath, and pressed with his right foot. The bike rolled forward smoothly, without stumbling, without the chain coming loose, just a clean and effortless movement. He pedaled again, a little harder this time, and the wheels turned easily, as if the bike had never been broken. I was waiting for something to go wrong. I was almost anticipating that frustrating moment when the chain would come loose again. But it didn't happen. He kept pedaling, gaining speed, sliding down the sidewalk, as if he had never had any problems with it. At first, Jason kept a slow pace, still waiting for something to go wrong. But when he realized that the bike was going perfectly fine, he leaned forward a little, squeezed the handlebars harder, and accelerated. He pressed the pedals harder, feeling the gentle movement of chain holding firm, the wheels turning without resistance. I had been using this bike for months, but right now it felt like new, like it had just come out of the store. He took a corner, testing how he was responding, and then pressed the brakes gently to make sure everything was in place. He was perfect. He returned to where Mac was, who was still watching him, calmly, as if he had known all along that this was going to work. Jason skidded to a stop a few feet away from him, planting both feet on the ground to steady himself. He looked at the bike, then at Mac, and then back at the bike. "Man, it's like it's another bike." Mac nodded, his arms still crossed, the shadow of a smile at the corner of his lips. "I told you so. I just needed the right arrangement." Jason stood there for a second, still gripping the handlebars, feeling something he hadn't felt since the bike started to fail weeks ago. Confidence. Before, every time I rode, I had this annoying feeling that something was going to go wrong. Now, that was gone. I didn't have to be checking the bike all the time. I didn't have to feel the frustration building up. I didn't have to worry that one bad pedal stroke would ruin everything again. I knew it was working, and that changed everything. Mac must have noticed something in her expression, because she let out a light laugh and pointed to the street with her head. "Come on, take her for a real ride. Let's see if it holds." Jason didn't need to be told twice. He pushed himself up and started pedaling, this time not holding back, not caring, just moving forward. The wind hit his face as he gained speed, gliding smoothly over the pavement, with the tires one side as he clung to the ground. It's been a while since I rode like this, without hesitation, without overthinking it, just enjoying the feeling of moving forward. He leaned a little, testing his balance, then took a curve with light hands on the handlebars. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about fixing the bike. I wasn't thinking about what was wrong. I wasn't thinking that it could break later. I was just riding. Jason kept going around the block, past the same houses, the same corners, but everything felt different. The bike was his again. It was no longer just something he was fighting with. It was no longer a problem he had to solve every time he got on it. It was just a bike, and it was doing what it was supposed to do. He walked past a group of kids playing basketball on the sidewalk, slipped past a neighbor walking his dog, and didn't even realize how far he had come until he saw the end of the street approaching. He pulled on the brakes, braking gently, and turned to return to the starting point. Max was still there, now with his hands in his pockets, watching, waiting. Jason pedaled back, still smiling. "Okay, yeah, this is solid." Mika felt as if he had never doubted it. "I told you so. I just needed a little patience." Hassan jumped off the bike, leaving her leaning against his leg. He wiped his greasy hands on his shorts, and then looked at Mac again, that same old curiosity shining in his eyes. "So, did you really ride a bike?" Max let out a short laugh. "Man, everyone rode bikes in those days. It was our way of moving. If you didn't have a bike, you were stuck." Jason smiled in disbelief. "Yeah, but I mean, you used 2 box, didn't you? You were already training and all that." Mika felt, slightly stretching her arms. "Yes, but he was still a child. I still had to go from one place to another. And in those days, no one took you everywhere. If you wanted to be somewhere, you rode a bike or walked." Jason nodded, as if that made sense. He moved a little on his feet, with his hands clinging to the handlebars without squeezing too much. "Do you think that if you had never boxed, you would still be strong?" Mike tilted his head slightly, thinking about that. "Strength isn't just muscles, kid. It's what you do when the going gets tough." Keep working on something. Keep pushing. That's how you become strong. Jason hung on those words for a moment, letting them sit. Then he nodded. Yes. It makes sense. Jason got on his bike, grabbing the handlebars, and looking down the street. He hesitated for a second, then looked at Mac again. Hey. My name is Jason, by the way. Mac smiled with a gesture. Nice to meet you, Jason. Jason nodded, as if he was saving that moment to remember later. You're great, man. Mike laughed. Yeah, you too, kid. Now get rolling before you mess it up again. Jason pedaled, moving smoothly along the sidewalk. This time, he didn't look back. I didn't need it. His bike was working. I knew I wouldn't fail him anymore. He turned the corner, disappearing out of sight, but there was something different about the way he moved. It wasn't just about the bike. It was about knowing that I could fix it. Max stood there for a moment longer, staring at the street, then shook his head slightly with a smile before turning around and walking on. It hadn't been a great time. There were no cameras, no crowd, no big speech. Just a kid, a bike, and a little patience. And for Mac, that was enough. Jason had been riding this bike for months, but this was the first time it really felt like his. No resistance on the pedals, no annoying chain slipping, no worrying if it would break in the middle of the street. Just movement, smooth and steady, like it was supposed to be. At first, he kept a slow pace, still waiting for something to fail, but when he pressed the pedals and felt that the bike responded exactly as it should, his confidence grew. He leaned forward a little, tightened his grip on the handlebars more firmly, and allowed himself to accelerate. The wind hit his face, fresh and renewing, a total contrast to the frustration he had felt 30 minutes earlier, when he was stuck on the sidewalk, convinced that he would never manage to make this work right again. Now, the doubt was gone. The insecurity had disappeared. I wasn't thinking about fixing the bike anymore, just about riding it. Jason turned at the end of the street, testing how the bike responded, feeling the tires stick to the pavement without wobbling. He pressed a little harder, gaining speed, feeling lighter with every second. It wasn't just about getting the bike working again, but about the feeling of not having to worry about it anymore, of just moving forward. He walked past a group of kids playing basketball on the sidewalk, then past a neighbor walking his dog, not even noticing them as he concentrated on the pace of the walk. It had been weeks since he had last been able to go that fast. Since he had been able to just ride without that nagging thought in the back of his mind that the chain might come off at any moment. Max was still standing in the same place where everything had started, watching, with his hands in his pockets, and the same relaxed expression on his face. Jason spun into a wide curve before coming back towards him, with the bike responding to every movement as if it were new. He slid to a stop, planting his feet on the ground, still gripping the handlebars, still smiling. Man, it's like it's a new bike. Max smiled slightly, nodding in that way that hinted that he always knew this would happen. No, it's the same bike, kid. Only now you know how to handle it. Jason looked at the bike frame, and then at Mac, thinking about that for a second before nodding. He assumed it was true. The bike hadn't changed, it just needed some work. A little patience. A little effort to make sure he could do what he was supposed to do. It was a strange feeling to realize that something could look broken, but not be beyond repair. That sometimes things didn't need to be replaced, just fixed the right way. And when they were, they could function just as well as before. Maybe even better. Jason adjusted his grip on the handlebars, slightly shifting his weight, feeling a little different than before. A little more sure of himself. He wasn't just a kid with a broken bike anymore. He was the kid who had figured out how to fix it, the one who had worked through the problem, even if he had needed a little help along the way. Jason wasn't the type to talk just for the sake of talking. If I said something, it was because I was really thinking about it. And at that moment, as he was looking at Mac, at the guy who had just helped him fix something that had frustrated him for weeks, he realized that he had a question that had been going around in his head for a while. Hey, do you think if you'd never boxed, you'd still be strong? Mac tilted his head slightly, considering the question, and then shrugged his shoulders. Strength isn't just muscles, kid. It's what you do when the going gets tough. Keep working on something. Keep pushing. That's how you become strong. Jason nodded slowly, letting those words settle in. He wasn't sure if he fully understood them yet, but something about them seemed right to him. Jason pushed himself up again, rolled a few meters forward, and then stopped, looking back. So what? Do you think I could become strong? Max smiled with a slight raise of an eyebrow. What do you think? Jason hesitated for a second, and then shrugged. I don't know. Max pointed to the bike with his head. You just learned how to fix it, didn't you? Jason blinked, looking at the bike frame, and then looking up again. Yes. You couldn't have done it 10 minutes ago. But I do now. So yes, you can also become stronger. Jason pondered that answer for a second before nodding, tightening his grip on the handlebars a little more. Great. Max stretched out his arms slightly, letting out a small sigh, as if he was about to keep walking. Jason adjusted his grip on the handlebars, facing the street, as if he was about to depart. It wasn't a big moment, not anything dramatic, just two people who had crossed paths, had helped each other in a small way, and who would probably never talk about this again, but who would remember it anyway. Jason took one last look over his shoulder. Well, I guess I'll see you around. Ma nodded, putting her hands in her pockets. Yeah, boy. See you later. Jason pushed himself up and started pedaling. This time, he didn't look back. I didn't need it. His bike was working. I knew I wouldn't fail him anymore. As Jason rode, she felt something change. Not just in the way the bike moved, but in the way he felt riding it. There was confidence now, a certainty that wasn't there before. He took a slightly tighter corner, pressed the pedals a little harder, got carried away faster than he normally would. He trusted her now. And that confidence made the ride feel completely different. Jason thought the problem was just the bike. That if I managed to fix it, everything would be fine. But now, as he moved down the street, feeling the soft slide of the wheels under him, he realized that it was something else. It wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was about knowing that if something broke, he could find a way to fix it. Maybe not always alone. Maybe sometimes with a little help. But still, I could do it. By the time Jason got home, he was already thinking about other things, what he would do later, what he would play, what he was going to eat. But somewhere in the corner of her mind, the conversation with Mac was still there, tucked away as a small but important lesson she hadn't expected to learn today. Mac watched Jason disappear down the street, then wiped his hands on his jeans one last time before turning around and walking on. It hadn't been a great time. There were no cameras, no crowd, not a viral moment. Just a kid, a bike, and a little patience. And for Mac, that was enough. Jason rolled around the neighborhood, his mind still replaying the conversation with Mac. At first, he didn't think about it too much, he just let the bike carry him forward, with the wind hitting his face and familiar streets passing around him. But as he was pedaling, he realized that something felt different. Not just the bike, although it was going smoother than ever now, but the way he felt riding it. It wasn't just about having wheels again, but knowing that if something went wrong, he could fix it. Before today, every time he rode, there was a little fear in the back of his mind. The fear of the chain coming loose again, of getting stuck somewhere, of having to walk all the way home, pushing a broken bike. That fear had been there for so long that he hadn't even realized how much it was holding him back. But now, he had disappeared. I no longer thought about what could go wrong. I was just riding. When he reached the end of the street, he looked over his shoulder, expecting to see Mac still there. But he was already gone. Jason smiled slightly, shaking his head. Mike Tyson had appeared out of nowhere, helped him fix his bike, given him some words of wisdom, and then disappeared like it was nothing. Like it's just another part of your day. Maybe he was. Jason didn't talk about it much that day. His friends asked him where he had been, why he had taken so long to get back, and he simply shrugged his shoulders. I had to fix my bike. I didn't feel like it was something I needed to explain. It wasn't an amazing story, at least not for him. It was just something that had happened, like any other small thing on a normal day. But later that night, as he sat in his room, twirling a baseball in his hands without thinking too much about it, Mac's words were still there, echoing in his mind. You just learned how to fix that. It took you a little while, but you worked it out. That's how you get good at anything. He thought about how frustrated he'd been before, how close he'd come to giving up and walking his bike home, how he'd worked it out. Not only, of course, but he'd still been a part of it. He had observed, he had learned, he had understood. Maybe that's what Mac meant. Maybe strength wasn't about being able to break through walls or win fights. Maybe it was about not giving up, even when something seemed impossible. A few days later, Jason was riding his bike when he passed a stretch of uneven pavement. He felt the bike wobble for a second and then heard that dreaded metallic sound. He braked instinctively, his heart sinking, already knowing what had happened. The chain had come off again. For a second, the frustration came up again, not again. He sighed, rolling his bike to the curb, ready to go through the whole process of struggling with it, of getting his hands dirty with grease, of probably getting upset again. But then he stopped. This time, I knew what to do. This time, I wasn't looking at the bike as if it was an unsolvable problem. This time, I had already learned how to fix it. So he bent down, took a deep breath, and started working. No panic. No stress. Just patience. And a few minutes later, the chain was back in place, his hands were a little dirty, but he was already on his bike again, pedaling as if nothing had happened. That's when he realized something. He was no longer frustrated. Because now, I wasn't afraid of the problem, I knew I could handle it. Mac never knew that Jason fixed the bike on his own that day. I didn't need to know. That wasn't the point. He had not helped to be remembered, he had not given advice waiting to see the results. He had simply been there in the moment, helping someone in need, and then he had moved on. That was the way things worked. People were always talking about the big moments in life, the ones with bright lights, big crowds, fights that made history. But the truth was that most of life wasn't about those moments. It was about the little ones. The ones that didn't make headlines, the ones that didn't get posted on the internet, the ones that didn't seem legendary at the time. But sometimes, those moments stayed with you longer than you expected. And that was enough.